It's my pleasure and honor to introduce to you Professor Antonio Andrade.
Thank you. Yeah, it is this too loud? It is a huge honor to be here. I worked, when I was just a dissertation student, I worked with Professor Leo Blusset in Leiden, and I remember the first time I encountered the archives after studying Dutch for years, and then finally being confronted with the paleography, and I cried. That's not an exaggeration, I literally cried. And then later got more and more used to it and loved it. So it's a huge honor to be invited to this Globalise project, because I've been following it since very close to the inception, and it has already begun to change the way that I do research. As Matthias has said, I began in the old days, like back when it was called the Algemeen Rijksarchief, and you had to turn the pages and the sand fell off, and that's a beautiful thing, and I hope that we will always teach our students to do that. But these new tools really open up huge new vistas. Now, when I received the invitation, somewhat to my surprise, I said immediately yes, of course, because Globalise is so important. I really do see it as one of the most important sort of projects that has happened with the VOC archives since, as far as I know, maybe since the publications of things like the Formosa DAG registers and things like that. So I immediately said yes. Usually I instruct my students, I give them the advice, when you are asked to do a conference presentation, do something that you're already working on. Don't do new research. And I utterly disregarded my own advice in this case, for the reason that I really felt that I wanted to use the Globalise. I wanted to dive into the sources again, specifically for this. So what I'm going to be presenting on today, part of it, and the part that I'll spend the most time on, is just brand new research. So I think that 2 days ago, Lodewijk was showing us a graph of use of Globalise, and there was a spike in January. I maybe was responsible for a little bit of that. But yeah, I wanted to do something new. But what would I do? And it occurred to me that Globalise really is a project of grand mediation, right? It's a way of taking something that was once sort of forbidding, and it still is, I think, forbidding to really understand the archives, and making it more accessible, mediating it so that more and more people can dive into these sources. So I wanted to do something on mediators then, I decided. Mediators, cultural brokers, translators, are something that has just fascinated me from the very beginning, from shortly after I began crying in the archives. In fact, I began my dissertation and then the book that came from it, How Taiwan Became Chinese, with a mediator, a guy named Salvador Dias, who was a Chinese mestizo, Portuguese-Chinese, Portuguese mestizo from Macau, or at least that's what we think. And he had been captured by VOC ships when Jan Pietersen Koen sent out the big expeditions to the Chinese coast with instructions, get as many people as you can, like capture as many people as you can, because as many as you bring, that's still not too much, because we have to populate Banda, for example, and other places. And so the people did, and many of those people, of course, the majority died before they even got to Batavia. But not Salvador Dias. He was quite lucky, I guess you could say. And so instead he became a translator here in Fort Zeelandia in about 1624, 1625. And the Dutch officials entrusted him more and more with translation. He could speak Portuguese, he could speak Chinese. He was literate, it seems, to a certain extent. And so they needed people like this, so they trusted him more and more, until one day he fled on a fishing boat and went to Macau and told the Portuguese all about it. There's a document that told the Portuguese all about the Dutch colony. And then the Dutch officials found out that he had actually secretly been giving pirates information about the Dutch colony, and even accepting illicit, under-the-table tolls, money. And this opened up this whole underground economy, right? Underground maybe is not quite the right word, but from the perspective of Dutch officials, illicit, right? Something underneath the surface. And so I ended up using this to open the dissertation, but the theme went through the dissertation and the book, and is something that I've never sort of forgotten, that mediators somehow are, I believe, a privileged place, a sort of privileged locus to understand many parts of the sort of colonial entanglement that often remain underground. So the official records on the surface are only the part of the story, and many of the panels, the panelists have talked about that sort of thing. How do we get at what's underneath? I think mediators are a good place to do that. So so I prepared a paper about 3 non-Dutch mediators, or 3 local mediators, you could call them, that worked in the same time period, 1630 to 1662. And they worked in very, very, sorry, hold on, I'm trying to, I skipped one. They worked in very, very different contexts, right? So, of course, the Octrooigebied, right, the Dutch East India Company's area of operation was immense, and that's one of the things that we as scholars have to contend with, right? All the local languages, all the local cultures and religions and everything was just so incredibly vast that the Dutch had to, the company officials had to find these mediators to help them interact, right? So I'm talking about 3 of them. I probably, definitely won't be able to get to all 3, but I'll sort of briefly talk about 2 and talk about 1 in a little bit greater detail. So one of them is Krotoa Eva from the Cape of Good Hope. And she was there at the beginning of a settler colony, you could say, right? In 1652, when Jan van Riebeek and company arrived there. She was already there, and she became a very important translator then, and mediator, cultural mediator, for the beginning of the Cape Colony, right, which became one of the most important settler colonies of the company. The second one is Osoet Pegua, who was in a very different context, right? She was in Siam, or Ayutthaya, and this was not a territorial colony, right? The Dutch East India Company was very much dependent on local powers, the court, the king, and so this was a comptoir, right? A factory. It was an office, not a territorial colony. So that's a different context, and she became quite important there. And the third is a man named He Bin, who was a Chinese translator and cultural mediator, who was present in Taiwan at the end of a settler colony, and a settler colony that was mostly inhabited by Chinese settlers. And he actually was responsible partly for that, for the end of that colony. So 3 very different people, right? 3 very different contexts. But there were some similarities that I sort of found, that may be similarities that are shared for more than just these 3. For one thing, they use their positions to make money and gain influence. Now, this is not a surprise. Many other people who've worked on mediators, Alida Metcalf, for example, who's worked on Brazil, have shown how mediators use their position to enrich themselves, become powerful, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of influence, power brokers. So that's probably not a surprise. But all 3 of them did that. Vast sums of money. They became very rich in 2 cases. He Bin and Osoet Pegua became very, very wealthy. So that's one thing. The second thing is they made close personal ties with company officials. 2 of them, Krotoa Eva and Osoet Pegua, made amorous ties. And that amorous ties maybe isn't the right word. We don't know if it was love, but it was sexual partnerships, let's say. In the case of Krotoa, it was marriage. In the case of Osoet Pegua, it was marriage, and then the Dutch would call it concubinage. So those, in the case of He Bin, as far as we know, he didn't marry any Dutch officials, but he did forge very close personal ties with the officials. And financial ties and personal ties. Now, that's the second thing. The third thing is they got in trouble. All three got in trouble. And Salvador Diaz got in trouble, the first person that I started looking at, right? He got in trouble. They got in trouble with the company. They also got in trouble with locals. So this peril of being in between led them into some very, very difficult situations. And in some cases, they managed to get out. And in other cases, it sort of ensnared them. But this trouble, this is the fifth point that I think is maybe the most interesting for me. This trouble caused, in each case, an eruption of documents. An eruption of documents into the surface of the VOC official documents that I think helps us, just as Salvador Diaz helps us, understand structures that were underneath, trading structures, other types of structures, social structures. The microhistorian Eduardo Grendi talks about the exceptional normal, right? The idea that exceptional cases, when looked at in detail, this is a microhistorical perspective, right? When looked at in detail, can illustrate things that maybe more official documents or more official kinds of narratives don't show. So I want to kind of use these people to look at that. A recent dissertation by Elizabeth Heymans, recent for me, in 2017, I believe it was, she talks about, she kind of makes the point that I'm hoping to make here, that when we look at mediators, she says we must transcend the dyadic relationship schema, right? Now, everyone who's here and has looked at VOC sources isn't just looking at colonize or colonized, right? We understand how manifold are the relationships, how many fissures are on each side. The Dutch officials fighting with each other, right? Writing reports against each other. On the one hand, locals fighting with each other. But mediators, I think, are a good place. They understood those fissures on each side. They had to understand them well. They exploited them, or they were sometimes hurt by them. So that's what I hope that looking at mediators can do. So I'm going to start with Osoet Pegua. It's going to be just kind of 3 case studies, but actually mostly just 1 case study because I don't have enough time to do all 3. Osoet Pegua, and she's someone who I had known a little bit about, but who I dove into the sources thanks to Globalise and learned more about and became so excited about that I couldn't stop. She grew up here in Siam, in the Ayutthaya kingdom, and this is an image attributed to Finkbones. Judea's Ayutthaya. We don't know much about her early life, but we know that she was possibly brought up near the Hollandse Logie here in the south of, Ayutthaya. Here's another image. This was a very a lot of people, different kinds of people lived here, of course. So you see in this French map from a little bit later, you see the Japanese, the Chinese, the Cochin Chinese, the Portuguese, the Makassars. But here's the one that's most interesting for us, which is the Peguans. She was a Mon woman, a woman whose people hailed from Bagu, currently in Burma. And she was these people were refugees that had fled to the Ayutthaya kingdom and were generally quite welcomed there. So she was Mon. She wasn't Siamese. A few scholars have looked into her, most notably Vil Odijk and Jivaratna Pompeda, and showed that she became a quite important figure, a quite important mediator in Siam, helping the company conduct trade and interact with the Siamese court. She was also a wealthy merchant herself, often is referred to as Koopvrouw. And she did this in part by forming close connections with Dutch officials. So here's what, I just wanted to say, I know that globalized people are interested in how we researchers interact with it. So this is very strange to see it so close up, so large. So basically to get into this, I started doing searches on her name, but of course, as you know, so Soet, Osoet, that's sort of her name, Soet, Hoot, Boot, because of the transliteration errors, and these brought up some things, Osoet, Desoet, Mesoet, Ohoot, Osoet, Pegua. I tried a number of queries like this, right, and these brought up many documents, but not enough. Not enough to really understand. And so I began to sort of dive into particular things. And I think that one of the things, I don't think that for the most case, and this corroborates, I think, what other people have been saying, that Globalise and these text searches, which are so powerful, are going to substitute for close reading, right? We still have to turn the metaphorical pages. Maybe we don't see the sand coming off, but we still have to do that kind of reading. But it gives us an entree into, and I don't think I would have been able to put together what I did in the last couple months without Globalise. I became quite interested in the early part of her life. Scholars have generally just said that she. Where is it? Did I miss that one? Here it is. This is sort of a Dutch official discussion of how she became great. How she became great by sleeping with various chiefs in Siam or directors in Siam is doubtless well known to your honors. This is a report to Batavia. And actually, sleeping with various chiefs in Siam is probably not the best translation, but I couldn't think of anything better. Door het bijslapen van diverse gewezen opperhoofden. So that is a hint of concubinage, right, too. So anyway, the idea is that she got wealthy and powerful thanks to sexual relationships with Dutch leaders here in the fortress, right? And generally, scholars have kind of followed along with this, saying that telling her life in terms of the three men that she was that we know of that she was associated with, a guy named Jan van Meijden. He's the second one. Now I'm blanking it. Jan van Meerwijk, Jeremias van Vliet, and Jan van Meijden. And so I became really interested in the early part of her life because the scholars have generally only devoted a paragraph or two to that early part. How did she become great? By sleeping with chiefs. So I began to look at the sources, and fortunately, doing that, Anne Heilen has written about and talked about how we understand women in the archives, right? And often it means looking at words that have to do with their relationships with men, like widow, for example. So I began to do more research, having found so few hits with the direct search for her on Jan van Meerwijk. And fortunately for us, he was an asshole. I don't know if he was like to her. She seemed to really love him, and he actually spoke about her quite warmly and called her mijn vrouw, my wife, when other officials often referred to her as his concubine. So but he was a hot-headed man who got into big trouble, and that's horrible. Not good for him, not good for Osoet, but great for us. So how did that happen? Jan van Meerwijk sailed to the Indies in 1618. He was promoted to junior merchant onder koopman in 1624, but by 1627 had left the company. And by 1629 was conducting private trade. Now, private trade is one of those topics that I think is sometimes difficult to get our heads around, and some of the papers have talked about that, intra-Asian shipping, and how do we know what's really happening in that level, since many of the sources are not fully on the sort of surface official level. But it seems that he got permission, not just seems, like he definitely got permission from officials in the Coromandel coast here to trade to Tenasserim here, which was then part of Ayutthaya kingdom, and then he would trade cloth from here, take it to Tenasserim, and then it would be transported over land to Ayutthaya. Oops, I didn't mean to do that, to Ayutthaya. And so this is a precarious existence, right? The Dutch East India Company was notoriously jealous of its own prerogatives, right? And so, but private trade was authorized at certain times, but you never knew if it would be taken away. And so he did well. He did too well, in fact. So well that in the Dach Register of 5 December 1631, it's written, the trade in cloth has been completely ruined due to the textiles brought by the free citizens von Meerwijk, von Hops and their partners, and another just one of these sort of flowery, like 17th century things that the branches are now as dry as they once were, laden with beautiful white blossoms and succulent, profitable fruits. So the people in Siam, the directors, complained to Batavia, to the Governor General and the Council of the Indies, and naturally they sent someone to stop this trade, right? This cannot go on because it's affecting our official profits. And this is what happened next. In the words of Jan van Meerwijk himself, who wrote this on a yacht, Commander Khan has confiscated my belongings and taken them with him so that everything here has gone to shit. Gescheten, right? Zodat hier gescheten is. So this document, when I found this document at first, you never know what you're going to find, right? So there was a hit. And I was like, okay, I'll just look at this. I had gotten to the point where I was just thinking that I wouldn't find anything else. And then this little document showed up, and as I read it, you know this feeling, right, that you get in your heart goes a little bit faster, and you go, aha, I found it. So, aha, indeed. This document is a letter that Jan van Meerwijk himself wrote. It is not a letter that it would have been reflected in the official archives of the VOC if it hadn't been for what Jan van Meerwijk did later, which got it confiscated, right? It is a document of private trade. It's a letter from him to two of his sort of partners, but junior partners, you could say. And what's interesting to me, aside from the fact that it exists in the first place, is that what it says about Osoet. So we knew very little about her early life, but here in this letter, Osoet is central. She's key to the whole thing, and it makes it clear that she's also key to his operation. So how is that the case? So let me see, do I have... Yeah, it's very hard probably to see there. But basically, first the letter notes and other sources confirm that the letter itself was deze laat in handen van Soet. This I leave in the hands of Soet, right? This letter is to be delivered by her, right? So she was active in this. And then it says, basically, if you bring any gold or other things here, so he's writing to people who are in a voyage themselves and heading to this place. He hopes to intercept them before anything bad happens. This is after Commander Khan made everything go to shit. And basically he says, give everything that you have, any gold or anything, altemaal aan voorzijde Soet, mijn vrouw. Give it all to the aforementioned Soet, my wife, right? So that's really interesting, right? She's key to this at the very beginning, right? This is very early in her life. Third, he made clear that his partner should follow Soet's advice. Doch zover, wait a second, December, January, doet gelijk Soet goed dunkt. Like, so Soet's in charge, do what she says, right? That just made me so happy. And then fourth and finally, he said very clearly that he placed all of his business and all of his everything, all of his affairs, as far as the ship was concerned, that they were bringing, these underlings were bringing, all in the hands of Soet, that she would be in charge of it, right? So, what does this tell us? This tells us not that she necessarily became great by sleeping with chiefs in Siam, right? But that she was an equal partner. It seems very much that she's an equal partner here. She's above the other subordinates, right? So I wondered whether there was a term to do this, like, because the terms for copreneurship, entrepreneurship by spousal couples. So I don't usually peruse the literature on business scholarship, but I found this very interesting. And it turns out that there's a large scholarship about copreneurship. And that in America, 10% of businesses at least are copreneurship's. Some of them very important ones like Crate and Barrel, The Gap, a number of others are copreneurship. And something like, I think it's 9, I have it written, but I'll just make something up now because that's what we do these days. There's no truth. Something like 7 trillion, I think it is, or $9 trillion of the US economy, which is a vast amount, is copreneurship. So I love this term because it kind of gets rid of the hierarchy, which I think is implicit in many of the colonial documents and some of the documents that historians have written based on them, or the studies, where the woman sometimes is secondary, right? She is very clearly at the heart of this thing. So that was kind of exciting. Unfortunately for her and for him, mostly for him, he began to act in ridiculously terrible ways. And this is what Joost van Schouten, poor Joost van Schouten, he was eventually tried and executed for sodomy, this horrible sin of sodomy in Batavia. But this was before that horrible sin was known. He's I don't know if many of you have probably read some of his stuff, but it's just so delightfully written. And he wrote what happened to Meerwijk. Driven by the losses he suffered and the violence of the Okra Sinuarwat, and apparently out of fear of the displeasure of the Governor General, Meerwijk fell into desperate schemes. So Sinuarwat, the Okra Sinuarwat, was a Siamese noble. I won't go into the details of why he got so angry. The two got angry at each other. Suffice to say that Jan van Meerwijk felt that he had been cheated. He had been forced to sell things at a price that was lower than he should have been forced to, should have sold them at, after an agreement about this. And you know how the Dutch of this period were. If you make an agreement and then you renege on it, or a contract, or you sign a treaty, well, that's immediately casus belli, right? You can immediately go to war. So he was quite angry about that. And then the guy gave him gold that didn't turn out to be as good. So he got very angry. And then began to act out. He took on board 10 Moorish merchants, 10 Islamic merchants with their goods, and then stranded them somewhere, taking their stuff. But more importantly, he waited for the king's ship. So the Siamese king was constantly sending vessels out for trade, and he attacked it, basically, demanding his money back. So this did not go well for him. It didn't succeed, and he had to flee. Eventually was had to flee. He eventually died. Okay, we don't know if he was hanged or beaten to death. And meanwhile, Osoet herself was arrested in Tenasserim, and had her things, her goods seized, and he asked for help. So before he died, he wrote this: "My wife, children, etc., have remained in Tenasserim and know nothing of my actions and are innocent. They might suffer trouble and tribulation from the Siamese," he wrote. "I pray and beg of you." This is a letter that he wrote to Schouten and the others in Siam. So indeed, she did get into trouble. She was arrested, and her goods were taken. Justus Schouten got her freed. Although we don't know if it was just him who did it, or because it's clear that she was also giving gifts to people who were to her captors. But she managed to get free, and she got many of her confiscated goods restored to her, or at least the few that remained after, as she called it, the plundering in Tenasserim. Osoet did fine without him, though. And so I wanted to say a little bit about what happened after this period. Also just to say that this sort of, the look beneath the surface brought up by this document, this letter, and also there were a few other documents, including an accounting, a private trade accounting, that Schouten called a slordige rekening, like a very messy accounting, that shows how the trade actually worked, this private trade. These, what was I going to say? Oh, right, that's what's sort of beneath the surface happening. So there's that, the private trade, right? We know that that's happening. We know that Osoet is key to it, right? And probably the case is that other women also were very active in this way. And this corroborates some things that scholars have argued about Southeast Asian women and trade. So after van Meerwijk, Osoet did just fine. I won't go into too much depth. She became utterly central to the company's Siam comptoir, mentioned frequently in the sources. She provided the company information about the Siamese court. She helped it gain trading privileges. She mediated with the Siamese court. She had close relations with the queen and the queen's court. She herself became a major trading partner of the company. She sold it rice, wax, gum resin, coconut oil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she bought from the company as well. So she also helped it understand trading relations, especially in the hinterlands. So she even had her own dedicated entrance to the fortress, apparently, not the fortress, to the lodge. This is Gijsbert Heek, who wrote, on the left side of the lodge, in the corner next to the stable, stands a door with a wide bridge that leads into the house or residence of Chow Soot. So she had a very sort of privileged relationship with the company. I'll skip over Jeremias van Vliet, but I want to talk about another Jan van. She had another Jan van, which was Jan van Meijden. And Jan van Meijden this is what Commissioner Pieter de Gooijer wrote about him. Jan van Meijden took Osoet as his mistress or concubine with express forethought, less for her beauty than for her assistance, seeing as he was destitute, and in order to learn the local language. So this is an inversion, right, of she became great by sleeping with various chiefs, right? This chief tried to make himself great by sleeping with her. And this reminds us of one of my favorite books of microhistory by our wonderful Leo Blusset. Most of you have probably read this or are aware of it, right? But this is Cornelie van Nijrode, right? And a man named Johan Bitter married her and then proceeded to try to take her fortune in delightful, not delightful for her, but really fun to read ways. I actually think the American, the English subtitle is even better than the Dutch. A colonial divorce drama of the 17th century. But this figure of a male gold digger, right? I think kind of suits Van Meijden. He was in many. I don't think he was. Well, there's differences, of course, but Van Meijden was clearly ethically flexible. Let's put it that way. He was. But the most, and he was out of his element, right? He had come to the power, to the position of director, because the previous director had been poisoned by a vengeful cook, and so he was raised up suddenly, and so Osoet became his lover. Now, people in the documents and also in the source in the secondary literature. Wondered why she would become so interested in him, right? It's clear why he would be interested in her. It appears that he, being a dashing young man, pleased her so much, blah, 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 such that she's still pretty much crazy about him, gelijk nog schier dol naar hem werd. And the secondary sources, historians have followed that, saying that that she was besotted with him. Maybe. But maybe also, she realized that he was a great catch for other reasons. And one of those reasons is that he was so out of his depth. He was certainly ambitious. He was not wealthy when he came to power. This is what Pieter de Gooijer later wrote, this commissioner. As far as I could tell, pretty much all of the company's trade in Siam is conducted by Jan van Meijden with the help of Osoet, the Peguan merchant woman, which is how this inexperienced person, i.e. Van Meijden, this newling, can carry out the trade effectively because he has managed everything thanks to the advice of the deeply savvy and experienced Osoet, right? Again, this is sort of an inversion of the standard thing. So he, She used him probably as much as he used her, or maybe they loved each other. They were co-preneurs. And we don't know the motivations of co-preneurs in every case. But he tried to hide his relationship with her. It's actually interesting. At a certain point, he wrote, he called her a vile woman in a letter to Batavia, explaining why he couldn't get something out of her. Like, the details aren't important, but he called her a vile woman. And this was after he'd already been involved with her. So why would he do that? A, maybe he's not a nice person. That's certainly probably true. But also because he seemed to try to want to hide their relationship, maybe because he was embarrassed about how dependent he was on her. I don't know. But as another official said, their cohabitation was, quote, as obvious to everyone as the sun in the sky. Anyway, the two made an enormous amount of money. They kept the trade in their own hands. But of course, this aroused suspicion. And Batavia began to send commissioners like Pieter de Gooijer and later Rijklof van Goens to go to Siam and figure out what was going on here and whether the company was being cheated because of their relationship and what van Muyden was doing. Indeed, they found enough that Jan van Muyden was summoned back to Batavia, summoned back to Batavia and where they found that he had somehow gained nearly 50,000 guilders to his name, which that doesn't sound like so much, right? That's not even 50,000 euros. But in those days, that's probably close to 10 million US dollars, right? So this is, and the magnitude is even greater than that. So 10 million euros probably, right? That's a lot of money. And they tried to investigate how he got it. Well, he said, well, I married somebody. As soon as he got to Batavia, he married someone else. And he said that was part of it. He also said he had borrowed money from Osoet and then invested it very wisely. They couldn't prove anything, but he was sent back to the Netherlands. In the meantime, Osoet was further investigated in Siam and found to, in fact, have been dealing with the company, selling things for much more than other merchants would sell them for to provide to the company. A certain number of merchants, Chinese merchants and others, said, yeah, we can sell those things for cheaper, but you guys always deal with her. What's that about? And so the commissioner, this is Rijklof van Goens in this case, investigated and found, yes, it was indeed the case that she was overselling. But then he writes this: we must refrain from rashly offending her, since she's a woman who, for various considerations, may well be given more for her wares than others. And later he wrote, actually earlier, she's a highly wily and conniving woman who enjoys the favor of the grandees of this kingdom more than anyone else, and therefore we must not provoke her, but must rather gain her trust. Batavia, the Governor General and the Council of the Indies, ended up agreeing, we can't touch her. Like, let her go ahead and fleece us. She's too important. And so she went on and ended up dying in 1658, very, very wealthy, leaving an estate that then was contended over. And her son with Jan van Meerwijk was one of the beneficiaries of the estate. There's a whole wonderful sort of fighting over the estate that I haven't really looked into, but which looks very fascinating. So, to conclude about her, she got into trouble. She became very powerful, right? She became an important mediator. She and Jan van Muyden generated these documents that erupted into the surface of the VOC archive. She got into trouble on both sides, right, with the Siamese and with the Dutch. But she persevered. She was so adroit, so effective, so central that she couldn't be shunted to the side. So I'm going to talk very briefly. How much time do I have left? Oh, I'm a little bit over. I'm going to go very fast because I just want to make a couple comparison cases very quickly. He Bin he's the fellow in Taiwan and based sort of here. He did this very similar things. He got very, very rich due to mediation, right? He made close relationships with company employees. He didn't marry them, I don't think. If that's the case, it's very, very deep, and we don't have that on the surface of the archives. He did a lot of private trade. He got into trouble with the company. He got into trouble with locals, but the trouble he got into was just even better than Osoet, like just amazing trouble. And this caused an eruption of intriguing documents. There's so many of these intriguing documents that erupted because of the trouble that he got into. And I'm just going to show you quickly one of them, which is a vertoog. I think the translation petition maybe isn't quite right, a remonstrance, but petition, it's a petitiony of the most important Chinese in Taiwan about the onhebbelijkheden, you can translate that yourself. Gepleegd door de tolk Pinqua. Pinqua is He Bin. And so basically, this document, again, similar to the ways that the document that I showed you, the letter from Jan van Maude, it illustrates some things that are going on beneath the surface that we wouldn't necessarily cop to without this kind of document. And I'll just show the first part of it. These, so 10 Chinese, 10 Chinese officials, sorry, not officials, but sort of important people wrote this. We could not refrain from finally bringing to your awareness, this is 1654, how sinisterly and faithlessly the translator He Bin has behaved vis-a-vis the company and the traders and inhabitants here. So it talks about how he was able to ingratiate himself with the with Dutch officials, with company officials there, such that they were afraid to bring any complaint to them. We feared that we might be held to be faithless complainers, despite the fact that we had nothing more in mind. All we want to do is show you how he's basically messing up your profits. He's giving little gifts to the collector's comptoir so that he can take the tolls and tiende and all these things for himself, etc. So, but the specifics are quite interesting, I think. It talks about how one of the things he did was he had a junk, one of his ships, that he sold bottomry from. So basically he got investments from a bunch of Dutch people in the colony, and then pretended that the ship was lost at sea, right? And then tried to gain the money. So this shows, and many other documents indicate as well, that the very close financial interests that the Europeans of the colony had with Chinese merchants like him. They made lots of investments, and many of these investments would not have been things that the leaders in Batavia would have countenanced. So again, this is a sort of look at an underground economy. He also talked about, they also talked about how he interposed himself between visiting Chinese merchants, collecting tolls that he said he was doing on behalf of the company. He also collected money from people in Taiwan who were sending money back to people in mainland China. This was a common thing, right? But he said he was collecting them on behalf of the company. So there's this whole sort of shadow economy that is hinted at in this document and in other similar documents when he got into trouble. So he got into such huge trouble, in fact. This is interesting too. This is a letter from Batavia to Taiwan. I'm sorry, I get too excited. I will stop very soon. It is a great abuse that you allowed He Bin to trade in Palembang. So basically, they licensed him to trade abroad, right? Again, the Dutch East India Company is not big about surrendering its prerogatives. So he sold pepper in Palembang. You will no longer give to Chinese any passes to trade there or anywhere else where pepper is to be bought. So Batavia is trying to control this. But what's interesting is, why would, is that it's very likely that the officials in Taiwan were investing in this vessel, right? And in many other vessels. And other scholars like Leo Blisset, for example, have talked about these close relations, right? But I think it's very interesting that it shows us again how what's happening on the local level, all these relationships is sort of bubbles up to the surface occasionally, but it helps us make sense of sort of larger movements. All right, he got into huge trouble. Eventually the Dutch found out that what sorts of things he was doing when they sent him to act as a diplomatic envoy to Zheng Chenggong, who was the Chinese warlord and Ming loyalist on the mainland. I've written about this, so I won't go into detail. Suffice to say that he completely pulled the wool over the eyes of both sides, basically ended up promising Zheng Chenggong that the Dutch would pay tribute, but in order to pay that tribute, he began collecting all sorts of tolls, and so he's misrepresenting to both sides. To the Dutch, he's just saying, I'm sending supplies, war supplies, and he's asked like Zhang Chenggong has asked very nicely for these war supplies, so I'm sending those. But how did he get the money to send them? By collecting tolls and things, and then he represented to Zhang Chenggong that this was tribute from the Dutch, which they never would have countenanced, right? So, and then eventually this game is caught because of another sort of financial chicanery that he carried out, which there are just so many great documents in which he's kind of double dealing. But this was found out and he fled, causing the colonial economy in Taiwan to nearly collapse because he had so many debts to people. And eventually, according to Chinese source, well, some sources, basically gave Zhang Chenggong a map of the Dutch colony and lots of information about the colony so that Zhang Chenggong, when he invaded the Dutch Taiwan in 1661, had a lot of information. And some sources even say he was on the ship that was one of the ships that was charting its way in. All right, so that's, I'm afraid that I won't be able to talk about lovely Krotoa Eva. I just want to make some quick summations. All three of these people made money, they got in trouble, they caused, thanks to that trouble, an eruption of documents that then helps us see subsurface, and I think that mediators can be very, very useful that way. I think I had many other conclusions here, but I don't have time. I do want to just say that Josephine Koopman, in her talk on Bedelbach's wonderful talk, talked about, I've felt that there's some anxiety about Globalise, right? And she talked about how there's a Faustian bargain, I think was the word that you used, right? When we use these sources, are we somehow abrogating our responsibility to really dive into the sources themselves? That there's a cost here, perhaps. And I think that the danger is real. Probably maybe not for people in this room so much, but maybe for our students and other people, right? There's no substitute for diving into these sources, for reading them, for turning the pages, whether digitally or in real life, right? There are so many beautiful, fascinating, terrible stories. And in a way, I think the anxiety is that this makes it too easy in certain ways. But I don't think it actually makes it that easy. It opens a way to find the real difficulties, and it's in those difficulties, those knots, those strange things that you can't understand, that the real, I think, the real scholarship, the real discoveries lie, and also the joy. I think that we will never, I hope, lose the joy of actually just turning the pages and just reading. Thank you. Wow.